How's it going, folks? Welcome. This is Teacher Mike from Phuket Pals. In this series of videos, I'm going to take you through a full GED Social Studies test, just to give you a flavor of what's on this test, what the standard is like, the types of questions there are, and just something to really boost your confidence as you move towards the big test day. So we'll do 10 questions in each video until we've finished the full social studies test. And then if you've got any questions about it, you can, put them in the comments section below, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. So let's fire away here, okay? Let's look at question number 1. It says, what type of government has a king or queen with powers limited by written or unwritten rules and a legislature that enacts laws? Okay, like all GED social studies questions, there's a lot of big vocab in there. Okay, so things like legislature. Okay, this is a lawmaking body of a government. So in the US, that will be Congress, the place where laws are made. So if you see anything connected with the word legislature, it means about the place where laws are made in a government. Okay, enacting a law, okay, means bringing a law into existence. Okay, so look at the question again. What type of government has a king or a queen with powers limited by written or unwritten rules and a legislature that enacts the laws? So what have we got? We have, just get our little pencil on the go here. Yes, we have a federal republic, a democratic republic, a constitutional democracy, and a constitutional monarchy. Now, it says here king or queen. Okay, so that's kind of pretty important. And powers limited by written or unwritten rules. So if powers of a king or a queen are limited by written or unwritten rules, this must mean that there is some kind of constitution in place to limit these monarchical powers. Okay, if you think about the UK, for example, okay, the UK has a king, and that king's powers are limited by the UK Constitution, which is actually unwritten. Okay, it's not like the US Constitution, which was written down. The UK's Constitution is what's known as uncodified. Okay, uncodified, meaning it's not written down. But in the UK, the king's powers are limited by the Constitution itself. Okay, so that is a bit of a dead giveaway. It must be A here, because a constitutional democracy doesn't necessarily have a king or a queen. A democratic republic, well, that doesn't have a king or a queen. And a federal republic, again, there's no king or queen here. Republics do not have kings or queens. So it has to be constitutional monarchy then for number 1. Let's look at number 2. Number 2 says, a common type of oligarchy is I'm going to pronounce this wrong, a junta. I think the Spanish say junta, but I'll say junta for today. A common type of oligarchy is a junta, a government led by a committee of military leaders. Which of the following is characteristic of an oligarchy? Okay, again, some confusing vocabulary in there. Let's kind of break it down. Okay, we've got oligarchy. It even tells us here what an oligarchy is. Okay, it's a government led by a committee of military leaders, so a military junta. Okay, a military junta. Which of these is a following characteristic of an oligarchy? Well, let's have a look. Power is effectively exercised by all citizens. Definitely not. Okay, because as we know, if power is exercised by all citizens, then we live in a democratic system. And that is most definitely not what happens in an oligarchical system under a junta. Okay, one ruler holds supreme power. Well, it's not that, because it says government is led by a committee of military leaders, plural. There's an S at the end there. So it's not about one ruler holds supreme power. C, a small group of people control the state. Well, that sounds pretty promising. Let's see what D is. A god or deity is recognized as ruler. Okay, so we all know what a god is. A deity is something that people worship like a god. Okay, so it's nothing to do with D. So it must be C here. Okay, a small group of people control the state. That's true. It's a small group of military leaders in a military junta. Okay, let's have a look at number 3. We're flying through these. Number 3, fill in the blank. Under the principle of something, the US government is divided into 3 different branches, each with its own duties and responsibilities. Okay, so the US government is divided into 3 different branches, each with its own duties and responsibilities. Okay, so think of it like this. In the US, it operates under a federal system, a system of federalism. The whole idea behind federalism is to make sure that power is not centralized in the hands of too few people, or in that, between too few departments in government. Federalism is about separating the power of government, about decentralizing the power of government. And that means, in theory, that one group or one person cannot have too much power. And it makes the system fairer. It makes it operate in a way that's better for more people in the country. That's the theory behind it. So this must be separation of powers. Okay, we'll just say separation of powers. Okay, separation of powers. Excuse my horrible writing. SOPs. Okay, separation of powers. If I try to write separation of powers out, the full words will be here all day. Okay, but that is the answer to number 3. Let's move on down to number 4 and see what we have. Notice this is a drop down menu. Okay, you get these drop downs. Let's call it a drop down. Okay, a DD. This is a drop down menu, and in the real test, you have to click on this and see which of the drop downs are the correct answer. Okay, so don't be shocked if you see a question like this. Okay, some of these questions look a bit strange. Maybe you haven't seen these types of questions before, but don't worry. If you approach it in a rational and calm way, all will make sense and you'll do well. Okay, so number 4, rights that are independent laws of government and therefore cannot be taken away by government are rights that are independent laws of government and therefore cannot be taken away by a government act are what? Okay, well, this is nothing to do with group rights. Definitely not. Read again. Rights that are independent of laws of government, independent of laws of government. So outside the laws of government. Okay, not the same as the laws of the land, but independent of that, and therefore cannot be taken away by a government act. So these are rights that exist outside the governmental system, the government system. These exist independent of that. So it's not going to be group rights. It's not going to be individual rights, because they would fall into the normal legal framework that governments would deal with. Legal rights as well would be something that governments deal with. So it must be natural rights. And if you don't know what natural rights are and where the idea comes from, I strongly advise that you do a little bit of research, because when the founding fathers were drawing up the Constitution of the United States all those years ago, what did they do? They didn't invent anything new. They looked into history and cherry-picked all of the best bits of what they saw, the best bits of governance from the past. They looked into the history of the Roman Empire, they looked into the history of the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, all of these wonderful periods in history where different forms of government were attempted. And what the founding fathers did was they thought, which bits worked best? And what they did was they took all the best bits, one of those being natural rights philosophy, and they rolled them all into a big ball, and they created the US Constitution and the US system. Okay, so natural rights philosophy, this is something you should look up if you don't know anything about it, as it comes up in this test again and again and again, because it's a fundamental principle that the founding fathers adhered to when they were making the US Constitution. Number 5, we're halfway through. Oh, look at this. A big scary graph. It's not really scary. Okay. Many of many of my students in the social studies, every time a graph comes up, they all panic. They kind of, like a snail, they go back into their shell and in fear. Don't worry about it, okay? You just have to really think about what's going on, approach it, as I said before, like in a rational way, without fear, and just see what you can do. Most of the information you should be able to ascertain by looking at the graph. So let's see what's going on here. It says authoritarian up here. We have left, we have right, and we have libertarian down the bottom. Excuse me. So if you don't know what authoritarian means, authoritarian is a style of leadership, a style of political leadership or social leadership, in which you have commonly a strong man, a very powerful, centralized power force who rules with an iron fist. Okay. Authoritarians don't take no for an answer. They're very difficult to deal with. And yeah, that's their political style. Libertarians, okay, libertarians are people who believe in liberty, as you can see from libertarian. They believe in freedom. Libertarians believe in small government. They believe that government should stay out of most of the affairs in people's lives. Libertarians believe in the individual. They believe that society is not a collective group. They believe that society is a collection of individuals who all pursue their own individual self-interest. Okay. And libertarians, first and foremost, believe in the idea of freedom, freedom for the individual. Here we have left. This is the left wing, the left side of the political spectrum. This is the right side of the political spectrum. If you don't know what the political spectrum means, it's just a scale. It's a scale from left to right that, depending on where a person sits on this scale, it tells you how far to the left, as in how far towards socialism and eventually communism someone would be, and on the right, how far someone is as a kind of, if you're in the extreme right here, you're probably an extreme libertarian or even an anarcho-capitalist, and you believe in, as I said, freedom, free markets, low taxation, small government. On the left, people believe more in the public ownership, the government's owning the means of production. So governments own factories, governments own property, and then the government distributes those out to the people. So here you have big government and no free market in the extreme, and here you have very minimal government and a very free market. That's a very simplified way of saying that, but anyway, it'll give you an idea just for the purposes of this video. So who have we got in these four squares? Who have we got in here? Let me just make that a little bit smaller. Okay, that's better. So in the top left box here, we have Pol Pot, okay, who was the leader of Cambodia in the 1970s. We have a communist leader, I should say, inspired. Would you say he's communist, or it was a Maoist? He believed in the ideas of Mao Zedong. He was inspired by Mao Zedong. Joseph Stalin, okay, the communist leader of Russia. I should say the Soviet Union, not Russia. Mao Zedong, the communist leader of China. Nicolae Ceausescu, who I believe was the leader of Czechoslovakia, I think it was. So I hope I'm not wrong about that, but I think it was a Czechoslovakia. Robert Mugabe. We have Fidel Castro from Cuba in here. And then we go over to the more right-wing side. We have Augusto Pinochet. Okay, Pinochet, who was, goodness, who did Pinochet preside over? Chile, I think. Yes, it was Chile. In fact, Pinochet was put into power after there was actually a democratically elected leader called Allende who was assassinated, and then Pinochet came into power in 1972, I believe, in Chile. there's a lot, I could talk a lot about that particular case because there's a lot behind it. But for this test, we don't need to go in that deep. George W. Bush, who is the American president, as you probably know, Thomas Hobbes, who was a British English philosopher who came up with the idea of the my goodness, the Leviathan. It's difficult to say Leviathan with the in front of it. The Leviathan. We won't go into detail on that. Charles de Gaulle, France. Winston Churchill, Britain. Margaret Thatcher, Britain. Adam Smith, okay, the inventor of capitalism. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, in which he laid out for the first time, I believe, in a kind of structured way, what capitalism is and what it can do for the world. Von Mises, okay, you're getting into the Austrian School of Economics here. Hayek, Austrian School of Economics. Ayn Rand, okay, her most famous book is called Atlas Shrugged. So Ayn Rand actually was a hardcore libertarian who wrote fiction. Atlas Shrugged is her most famous book. Karl Popper, Milton Friedman. Okay, over here we have getting to the left wing. We've got Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. Okay, so South Africa here, India here. Thomas Paine, Noam Chomsky. Okay, very famous. Emma Goldman, famous anarchist, and Peter Kropotkin. I butchered that name, but forgive me. So basically, sorry, I went into way too much detail there, but maybe it was of some interest to you. The further left you go here, the more left-leaning people are, the more socialist people are. And at the bottom here, we have libertarian socialists. So someone like Gandhi was a very left-wing socialist. Then we have more authoritarian socialists up here, like Pol Pot, as I said, was an authoritarian communist leader, inspired by Mao. Joseph Stalin as well. Well, he wasn't inspired by Mao, but these were inspired by the writings of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, etc. Okay, in 1848, the book The Communist Manifesto was co-written by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, and that this book talked about how there was a class struggle between what they called the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. So you had the owned and the owners. You had the workers and the owners, effectively. And people up here, these guys, they would very much believe that the only way for society to become just and fair is if wealth, all the money in society, was taken away from the super rich and redistributed, given out to everyone in society to have a more equity, more equality between people. Okay, that's again basic, but for this purposes of this, it's fine. So again, let's just dig into the question then. Okay, number 5. It says, what does this graph show? A comparison of the economic and social beliefs of various public figures. It's pretty possible. An overview of various kinds of government systems. Well, it's nothing about governmental systems itself. It's about political theory, political belief. So it can't be B. A detailed look at diverse economic systems. Well, it's not really about economic systems, but political theory. So I wouldn't say C. D, an explanation of the difference between leftist and rightist politics. Well, it's not an explanation. It just shows us what different figures in history, where their political allegiances lay. Okay, like what the kind of political theory that these famous people embodied. So there's no explanation here at all. So it can't be D. So it has to be A. A comparison of the economic and social beliefs of various public figures. Okay, so we have the economic scale, as it says, and social scale. So you've got the social beliefs, and then you have the economic beliefs here, and people are placed accordingly to left, right, libertarian, and authoritarian. 6, according to the graph, which of the following would be best described as a conservative libertarian? A conservative libertarian. So as we know, libertarian is over here, and a conservative libertarian would be probably let's see, George W. Bush. Where's he? Okay. Okay, well, he's not a libertarian as much. He's up in the box up here towards authoritarian, although not quite. So it's not George W. Bush, Robert Mugabe. Where's Mugabe? Mugabe's up here. Well, he's not a libertarian either. Okay, he's moving towards the authoritarian box, authoritarian area, I should say. Adam Smith. Adam Smith is here. He is in the libertarian box, but he is not as far to the right as Ayn Rand. Okay, so Ayn Rand would be the most conservative libertarian in here, up there with Hayek. So yeah, Smith isn't quite as conservative as Ayn Rand. So yes, I would put the answer as Ayn Rand there. Okay, and we'll give this a circle as well. I forgot. Okay, moving on, number 7. According to the graph, which of the following is most likely to have socialist political views? Okay, so as we know, socialism is over here. Okay, we have, because socialism is connected to the left of the political spectrum. So it's people in this side, not this side. This is the right side of the political spectrum. This is the left. Socialism is over here. So let's see who we have. Socialist political views. Karl Popper. No, it can't be. Look, he's over here in the libertarian box. Thomas Hobbes. Where's he? Thomas Hobbes is up here. No, he's definitely not in the socialist camp either. Mahatma Gandhi. Oh, definitely. Look at him. He's way far to the left, the libertarian left. So it's probably him. Robert Mugabe. Mugabe is up here. So he's in the socialist camp, but more to the center of that. So Mahatma Gandhi would be the most socialist in here. So Mugabe, no. I would give that point to Mr. Gandhi. Okay. All right, moving on. I've got a few more questions to do. Here we have another graph. Okay, it says here, the executive branch. And then we have reprieves and pardons, appoints judges to fill vacancies in the court. Okay, executive branch, judicial branch, legislative branch. So here we have a little map which outlines what each branch of the federal government does, what the executive does, the judicial, the legislative. Okay, just remember the executive branch. In there, you have the president of the United States plus his cabinet. And then the judicial branch, you have the highest judges in the land in the US. This is also known as the Supreme Court. Then we have the legislative branch, which is Congress. Okay, and if you don't know, Congress has 2 separate parts. Okay, it's a bicameral, called a bicameral legislature. So 2 different parts. It has the House of Representatives and the Senate. And again, all of this stuff that we're discussing here, you need to go away and read lots about this, because this, as I say, it's like 50% of the social studies test is based around civics and government. So this is extremely important stuff to revise before the big day. Anyway, number 8. What does the chart represent? What does the chart represent? Okay, so let's have a look at some of these things. We have executive branch grants reprieves and pardons, appoints judges to fill vacancies in the court. So the executive branch appoints judges to the judicial branch. Judicial branch then interprets the laws, determines the constitutionality, and they serve for life. The legislative branch, power to institute new courts, authority to impeach the president, approve judicial appointments made by president. Okay, and it says here, arrows indicate the direction of a check one branch exerts over the other. Okay, so this is all about the system of checks and balances that exists in the US federal government. If you don't know what checks and balances are, this is a good little example of what it is. Again, this is the idea of federalism, where you have power decentralized in the system. So each of these areas, each of these branches, I should say, of the federal government, they can check each other's power. They can prevent, they can prevent too much power being exerted by one branch over the other. And if you read these boxes pretty carefully, you will see that. Okay, so the executive branch, it can be checked by the judicial branch or legislative branch, and they all have power over each other. So one area does not reign supreme in the power struggle. Okay, so what does this chart represent? The functioning of a democracy in a typical parliamentary republic. A typical parliamentary republic? No, it's the US. Okay, so it can't be that. It's nothing to do with a typical parliamentary republic. B, the process by which an act of the US Congress becomes law. It's not about the legislative process on its own. It's about the interaction, the checks and balances, interaction between the three branches of the federal government. The power of the US president to appoint members of the government. Again, that's too specific. It's not just about the US president. It's about the entire system. So it must be D. Checks and balances of power between the branches of the US government. And yeah, if you could have got the answer pretty much from here. So as long as you knew about the concept of checks and balances and you read this bit here, you would immediately know the answer to this question. Nothing too complicated, but as I always tell my students, you need to know the different concepts in the GED Social Studies test. You need a basic overview of all of these concepts. Then if you can apply these concepts to the question in a calm and rational way, you will get the answer. Okay, it looks so complicated, it looks so difficult when you look at this, but the answer is clearly there if you look closely enough. Moving on, number 9. Which branch of the US government has the power to impeach the president? Okay, so what does impeach mean? Impeach means to kick the president out, effectively. If the president does something that's unconstitutional or illegal or something like that, they can be removed from office. So which branch of the US government has the power to impeach the president? Well, I can see the word impeach already here. Here it is. Power to institute new courts, authority to impeach, authority to impeach. Where's that coming from? It's coming from the legislative branch. Okay, so impeachment powers lie with Congress, the legislative branch. Okay, so we can give that a circle. And then the final question for today, the final question, excuse me, number 10. US presidents may retain influence over the Supreme Court long after they have left office. Which of the following explains this? Presidents appoint Supreme Court justices who serve life terms. Okay. Presidents may retain influence. That means keep influence over the Supreme Court long after they've left office. Okay, so as we said up here, the president actually appoints judges to the Supreme Court. And look, it says, here as well, judges appointed by the president serve for life. So the president can put judges in place that he wants, and they serve in that position in the Supreme Court, in the judicial branch, until they die or retire. Okay, so that gives the president quite a lot of influence over the judiciary. Supreme Court justices consult former presidents before ruling on cases. Nonsense. Former presidents have the power to impeach Supreme Court justice. Nonsense. Former presidents advise their successors on. No, absolute nonsense. It's the first one. Okay, so presidents appoint Supreme Court justices who serve lifetime terms. Yes, that means they can retain influence over the Supreme Court after they stop being president. Okay, guys, so that is the end of today's video. I hope you found this useful. I'll be back with another 10 questions very soon. So until then, have a good day. Bye-bye.